After storming through Serie A and becoming league champions under Conte, Lukaku's stocks were high last season, and rightfully so. Now that he's returned to the Premier League, however, he's seemingly reverted to being a shell of himself. The old Lukaku from the United years is back, apparently. But why? What led to his success at Inter, and why is it failing at Chelsea? Hey, I'm Adrian, and welcome back to another Friday upload with us here. Today, we're speaking with Inter and Serie A expert Uncle Sharma about what made the Conte system work for Lukaku in ways that the Tuchel system hasn't, or at least not yet. But first, a big shout out to our sponsors for this video, Spitch. Do you like fantasy football? Do you like cash prizes? Do you constantly forget to reset your team each match day and ultimately suffer because of it? That's the only reason why I never win fantasy football. Not because I suck at fantasy football. It's because I forget, okay? But you don't need to worry about that with Spitch. Spitch is a match day by match day competition, so no carryover, and you always start fresh each time. Plus, Spitch adds even more skill to your selections by providing you with all sorts of metrics to make informed decisions. Players accumulate points differently than other fantasy football games. It's more elevated than other games. And by the way, you can now join my Elite League in Spitch, the RTV Elite League within the Premier League competitions on Spitch, in which you can play against fellow Rabona TV subscribers to see how you fare comparatively. So, use the link below to sign up for Spitch, then use the link under that link below to join our community as well. Thank you, Spitch. On to Lukaku. When Lukaku arrived at Chelsea, it felt like he was the man they needed to address their issues that they had with their strikers in Tuchel's system. Lukaku had left the Premier League to play for Conte's Inter. He conquered Serie A and looked like he was an improved attacker, returning to clear up any unfinished business he may have had in the Premier League, and especially with Chelsea. And he certainly started well, didn't he? His performances against Arsenal and later Aston Villa pointed to a Lukaku who, while having some injury layoffs in the early part of the season, pointed to a Lukaku who was indeed an improved version of the player we last saw at Manchester United. But around the time of that Sky Italia interview where Lukaku spoke of his love for Inter, how he wants to return eventually, how he apologized to their fans, I mean, we've all heard this story by now. But from that point on, and the outrage it caused amongst Chelsea supporters, things went wayward for Lukaku. He looked shaken. He looked like the Lukaku of old who can't control the ball and who blows opportunities he should be converting. And perhaps even more worrying, how uninvolved he has been, with the match against Palace being the ultimate example of that. Lukaku was involved so seldomly against Crystal Palace that in 90 minutes played, he touched the ball just 7 times. 7 touches across 90 minutes means that, according to Opta, that was the lowest ever for a player playing 90 minutes since they started collecting data back in the 2003-2004 season. On top of that, Who Scored have pointed out that following the match against Palace, Lukaku had lost possession more times due to a poor touch than he had shots attempted in the Premier League. Not shots on target, shots attempted. This isn't to pile on or make fun. This is just to show how out of sorts he is this season. Uncle Sharma and I did a video on Lukaku last season as he was completely different from the player we are used to in the Premier League now. And his touch and his ability with his back to goal, his hold-up play, was vastly improved under Conte. We'll get into that more once we get Uncle Sharma involved in this video later, however. But that stat, the 7 touches in 90 minutes versus Crystal Palace, really speaks to how he has played recently. Disconnected from the rest of his teammates, not really involved in the play in the first or final phase even, and some players simply cannot stay sharp or engaged when they aren't getting regular touches of the ball. I mean, when you look at how little he's been involved, he has a shots on target per 90 stat of 0.76, putting him in 49th in the Premier League. That's his lowest number by a long shot. No pun intended, given that he simply isn't getting the opportunities due to his lack of involvement in the attack. 28 attempts, 10 on target, and his lowest shots on target percentage of his last 6 seasons. It's not that he isn't trying to get involved, he is, as he is making runs, but when Chelsea are dominating the ball and having to pass their way through teams that sit low, as they often do in the Premier League, that isn't suited to a striker like Lukaku, as he has seemingly stripped back all of the things he was good at while with Inter, while the dynamism of a Havertz, for example, has recently become the favored route for Tuchel and other managers as well, who don't want to play with a strict number 9. So why did they buy him in the first place? Let's look at why Lukaku was thriving at Inter and what that would require from Chelsea. One of the things that Fabio Capello said recently surrounding Lukaku's struggles was, quote, Lukaku fit perfectly into Conte's counter-attacking style at Inter because there were lots of spaces. He had his physical strength and pace that allowed him to flatten the defenders in Serie A. However, Chelsea play this very different type of football with lots of short passes, and Lukaku doesn't have the same spaces to move in. He also finds that in England, the defenders have a similar physicality to him and hold out more. Lukaku had this power and space to run at defenders and turn the game around. So let's dive into that further with Uncle Sharma.
He was a complete striker for us. I mean, in his last season at Inter, he scored 30 goals in all competition, but he also had 10 assists. Which was, the joint highest in the Serie A. So this guy was scoring goals, but also creating a lot of goals as well. He was the go-to guy for Conte. Like, the team was kind of built around Lukaku, so you could say, with Inter, because even if Lukaku had some sort of injury or if he was, had some sort of issue, Conte would try his utmost best to force Lukaku to play. Like Lautaro and Sanchez was a good partnership in the absence of Lukaku, but Conte was, if Lukaku is fit, Lukaku is playing, and a lot of the times when Inter was struggling, he was our outball. We're in trouble, launch up to Lukaku and he'll do something, Lukaku and inshallah, as some Inter fans would like to call it.
And so speaking of partnerships, etc., what was the general shape that Conte used at Inter? Because it's quite different in many ways, at least how the attackers are organized, than what Tuchel is doing. So where did Lukaku fit into Conte's shape?
Yeah, I mean, it was 3-5-2 till death with Conte. He pretty much never changed it. And yeah, Lukaku was the right striker in that formation, allowing him to drift on that, that right hand side, on that right channel, so it allows him to cut in on his left foot. So sometimes, you could even say it was a kind of a hybrid role. He would play a target man at times, but sometimes he would be almost like a winger, allowed to give him that freedom to come off that right hand side. Whereas at Chelsea, from the few matches I've watched, undercover Inter fans watching, our 115 million sale, the 3-4-3, and then Conte himself mentioned it on the Italian TV. They asked him about, what do you make of Chelsea and Lukaku? This was a few months ago, I think, when Chelsea played Juventus, and he said, they're not using him properly. That 3-4-3 formation, Lukaku seems like he's very isolated. He's being asked to be just, a target man, or just, being isolated against the centre backs, which he can do, but it seems like he isn't able to do it for Chelsea. So he's definitely not being utilized properly at Chelsea. I think the one game where I seen him utilized properly was against Aston Villa, where I saw him, drift out onto that right hand side, use his pace and power against the defenders. Yeah, I think Tuchel's definitely sacrificed, Lukaku for his favorite 3-4-3, which obviously they won the Champions League with that formation, so you can't blame him. But I think that is one of the issues.
For sure. And something that you're sort of alluding to was how he improved so much, and we actually made a video about this together, which I'll link to in the description, is how he had improved so much to become this complete striker that you mentioned. How his touch, which was previously meme status in the Premier League, had improved so much while at Inter. How his ability with his back to goal to be able to hold up the ball. You told that little tidbit about, I believe it was it Ranocchia? Who Conte had just like absolutely hammering balls at him with Ranocchia at his back to improve his back to goal. And all of these things just aren't really working out. And like you said, and like Conte pointed out, he just feels isolated and sort of alone up there. I don't know how many times I've watched Chelsea and just seen Lukaku sort of hanging out with the two center backs and between them, waiting for something to happen. But that was completely different at Inter, wasn't it? Because of that Lalu partnership, correct?
Yeah, the Lula partnership, which is funny. Yeah, which is funny because it seems like at the moment they're both missing each other. Lautaro is going through a very torrid spell at the moment at Inter. So he hasn't scored an open play since December. There's a lot of memes being made about them two missing each other. Lukaku wants to be, back in Milan, and Lautaro wants his favorite partner in crime. And now is the touch, as you mentioned. The meme is back. Like before, it looked like he removed the Timberlands at Inter, but it looks like he's put the Timberlands back on. But I think that has to do more with confidence. I think he's just looks like a shadow of himself. At Inter, he was, you saw how he was like, going up to Ibrahimovic in the derby, and like he felt like he was the main guy. He was calling himself the King of Milan. I even made a t-shirt in homage to the guy. But in Chelsea, he's not the guy. He's not that guy, as the meme says. and he's not the main guy for Tuchel. So I think that loss of confidence definitely looks like, I think, has affected him, and the loss of that partner in crime, as I said, with Lautaro. You know, the good two of them used to be so close to each other. They used to bounce off balls to each other. You know, Lukaku winning the header down to Lautaro, and then those memorized movements that Conte, you know, we've seen, Spurs fans will know about, those memorized transitions that they know exactly what to do as soon as they get the ball. I think with Tuchel, he gives a lot more freedom. I don't think there's any specific instructions to the players to do something at certain points. I think that helped Lukaku, where he knew what to do before he even got the ball. So I think that helps a lot in Conte's football, those types of memorized movements.
Yeah, so I think that it's become abundantly clear to us at this point that Lukaku is a lone striker. It just doesn't really work, and he needs someone to play off of him. So if you were looking at this Chelsea side, let's say that it's manager Sharma, not just the uncle anymore, it's manager Sharma, and you had the ability to choose the team. I mean, would you just set it up how Conte had set it up? Like, just basically you would make sure that Lukaku has someone to play off of, someone in sort of the Lautaro role, I guess you could say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you could say maybe someone like Timo Werner seems, you know, Timo Werner, where he was being mentioned as a possible Lautaro replacement if we ever sold Lautaro, although Timo Werner is, like, you know, a lot quicker and more of a winger than Lautaro would say. But, you know, I could see him potentially being that guy. But I think it's more, it doesn't necessarily have to be a 3-5-2, because we've seen with Belgium, they play 3-4-2-1, I believe. You know, usually I think it's like De Bruyne and someone else, you know, is it Mertens or someone in behind Lukaku? And we saw Lukaku made the UEFA Euro team of the tournament. And, you know, he was good for Belgium at the tournament, playing a lone striker. But I think it's more about getting someone closer to him, so there's someone to bounce the ball off, so Lukaku doesn't have to just hold it and then wait for someone to come in. It has to be, you know, he's there and there's someone straight away from his, you know, first or second touch being able to lay it off, and then Lukaku can be off on his bike, get into the box and get onto the end of a ball.
What was working at Inter might not work at Chelsea, because Tuchel doesn't play with two men up front. As much of the attack siphons through the wings and through the wingbacks, as opposed to using Lukaku as the out ball. And so now, when you look at Lukaku's heat map, he's mostly central, mostly uninvolved. You know, in reading what Thomas Lemar had to say of his initial struggles at Atletico, he spoke of how he would sometimes go 10 minutes or more without touching the ball on the wing. And so the move to the middle for a short stint was highly beneficial for him. The more time on the ball, the better he played. Clearly, Lukaku is the type of player who needs to be involved in the play. Otherwise, he's going to go cold and he's going to become less and less involved. On top of that, you do have to question whether Tuchel really sanctioned this purchase, or whether he wants to move toward this strikerless, more dynamic approach that's been adopted by the likes of Klopp and Guardiola that doesn't really require an out-and-out number 9. But regardless, I think it's safe to say that a change of system would be required for Lukaku to not only start scoring again, but for him to have a chance to reach those levels he was at while at Inter. Because Lukaku needs a player to play off of. I want to thank Uncle Sharma for joining me once again. Do make sure you check him out, as he has incredible coverage of Inter and some Serie A news as well. But aside from that, I'm Adrian, this is Rabona TV, and have a great weekend. Ciao.